This is my shop wood stove, and this is a 55-gallon drum heat exchanger that I built for it. This thing works amazing. Even in the uninsulated shop, it's down in like the teens of degrees outside. It can keep this place 50 or 60 degrees pretty easily. It's like 30 maybe, 20 something degrees out, and it's 60 in here, so it's working well. So let me show you how I built it. Obviously I started with the wood stove. It's an Ohioan from the 80s. I picked it up from a friend of mine. But everything up from this, I fabricated. So I started with a 55-gallon drum. I picked it up from some online ad. I think it was an old food grade oil drum or something. I paid a couple bucks for it. I peeled the stickers off. One of them came right off and the other one kind of put up a fight. So I sanded most of the paint off. There's really two ways to get the paint off. One is to burn it off, and the other is to sand it off. After kind of testing sanding the paint off, it pretty much came right off with one stroke with my electric DA, so I just opted to do that instead of starting a fire. The lid, the top doesn't come off of this barrel, so if I wanted to start a fire to burn it, I'd have to drill a big hole or cut it in half first or whatever. So it took a little less than an hour to sand it all off, so it really wasn't too bad. So with all the paint sanded off, I scribed my cut lines. I wanted to make the barrel about the same length as the stove, just for aesthetics, and I wanted one of the ribs in the middle, so I marked it accordingly for that. So welding this thin barrel was a real pain, even with the TIG welder. So this step isn't really necessary. It added quite a few hours of work, and I mean, if you didn't care if your heat exchanger was the exact same size as your stove, I would probably skip this step because it took forever. But I do like the aesthetics of the two things being about the same size. So after that, I needed a hole for the intake into the barrel coming out of the stove. So I used an old piece of flue pipe and scribed a line. Cut a couple holes so the jigsaw could get in, and then jigsawed the hole. So I did have to fine tune it to get it to fit. I used the old pair of calipers for that. And that got me really close. Then I used a small piece of sheet that I clamped to the stove outlet and welded in place there so it was a nice tight fit. So I tacked that in place, wrapped while it was clamped around the outlet so that it was a nice tight fit. Purple. And that worked out really well. So I tacked it in place with everything kind of semi-assembled so that it all stayed aligned and that the fit would stay real nice. And then I fully welded that to the barrel. Again, it's not easy to weld to, the stuff's super thin. So for the barrel outlet, I just used another piece of flue, welded it up. I cut it a little bit just to make sure the length was exactly right with the rest of the flue pieces I already had. So instead of cutting a bunch of stuff to fit, I just cut this outlet to fit. I also drilled some holes for a little flapper damper in there, so that's good to have when you're trying to bring the fire down. Usually I get this thing just going as hot as I can and get it nice and hot in here, but if you wanted to control the fire, those little flapper dampers are pretty good. And there she is. We'll call it phase 1 of the heat exchanger done. I've been waiting for a nice day. It's like 50 out. I'm gonna start a fire and see if with the door open, I can burn that little bit of paint off. And for phase 2, I'll be putting some of this tube. It's actually for something else, but I'll use some offcuts of this tube and put it where it shoots through the barrel, and I can blow heat through it and really get some good air movement. Alright, I'm going to open the door and start a fire and see if we can burn this paint off. It's only been a few minutes, but See the barrel starting to change color. Oh yeah, smoking off some of that paint. Got the windows and the door open. We'll let all that burn off. All right, time for phase 2. There was a delay between phase 1 and phase 2 because it got really cold, and I wanted to use this instead of work on it in the cold. And I was working on a couple other things while it was cold. Got a new toolbox, reorganizing my tools. Got a used 2-post lift. That's exciting. I already cut out some tubes. I gotta clean those up, and then we'll do some layout on the barrel, drill some holes, hole saw, weld the tubes in, and then the fan can blow through the tubes and get way more heat out of the wood stove. All right, these are deburred. Spent a little bit of time in CAD, and I'm gonna do a 9-hole pattern, 3x3 square on 4 1/4 inch centers. So I'm going to find the center and then mark a 4 1/4 inch circle around it, and that will be the center line of everything else. And then I can use my laser for the vertical and horizontal lines to make sure they're nice and square and plumb. I'm going to sweep a couple of arcs at the same distances. Spin 4 1/4. Mark my horizontals and my verticals. Those are fine. Then I mark my grid. Honestly, not terrible. Hole saw was a little unruly, but it made pretty decent holes after deburring them. Everything fits okay. There's a little bit of gap, which is to be expected, but we'll kind of hammer everything in as I tack it, and then get this all welded up. Fit in the back. It's another day. Got cold, it snowed. Snow. 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 Deer tracks. Snow. So I need this thing done. So I'm going to clean up all the surfaces, weld it all together. I had this old fan. and I needed a way to mount it. So I bent up some hooks, just heated those up with some MAP gas. I had an old MAP gas container that I found like buried in the rock in this building that didn't seem super safe, so I figured I'd burn it up. So use it to heat up these, bend them into shape. Little fan hanger. Two things, I wanted them kind of adjustable, and I also wanted to be able to take the hangers out. So in the event I'm not using it, I can take those out and no one will hit their head on them or whatever. So I made these little locking blocks. I had a piece of 3/4 inch by 1.5 or something steel that I roughly faced and cut a slot in. And then I cut some little pieces of plate that I welded to the bottom to stand off to kind of get the piece of rod up off the stove. Tapped and drilled for 1/4 to lock them in, and they seem to work okay. So I positioned everything and tack welded it all in. And if you're wondering if it works with the fan on, it worked great before with just the barrel without the tubes through it and the fan kind of blowing on it. But this thing with the fan on high and the fire really going, and the fan on, you can't even put your hand in front of the thing for very long. It's just too hot. And it's 24 or something outside, and it's at least 55 in here. Now I'm in a t-shirt, so it works amazing. I love this thing.